So I have this recipe for a boozy chocolate cake that is not gluten-free. To convert it to being gluten-free, I have pulled up this chocolate layer cake recipe, which I've made before, so I know that it works. It's from America's Test Kitchen. Now, ideally, I would have found another bundt cake recipe like this one, because at this point, it's probably going to be easier for me to add the wine to this than it will be to make this gluten-free. But what I've already done is I've tried to match up the ingredients here, and you'll see they're in slightly different amounts. But for instance, this is 2 cups of flour. This is a little under 2 cups of flour, but I went down the list and I put them in order so that they would line up. If you want to, I can't get both of them. Then you'll see those blue ones are ones that don't match up exactly, but they kind of have an equivalent. Like that 1 cup of vegetable oil, that's going to serve the same purpose as that butter. Those 6 ounces of chocolate are, it's going to make it a little wetter than the pound cake would be, but I do have a little less cocoa powder here than I do over here, so I think that that will equate that out. And this baking powder and xanthan gum help to give it the shape and texture, which it will lose from the gluten. Also, you'll see that I have a little more flour here than here, and I'm pretty sure that that will make up that difference in dry ingredients. So then I'm left with 1 cup of milk and 1.5 cups of wine. Do I know exactly what's going to happen when I switch those 2 out? No, it's going to be an experiment. Now, cooking in general, but baking in particular, is a science. So you can break most recipes, especially baking recipes, down into formulaic parts. Both of these recipes are cooked at the same temperature, which is something that I'm going to be looking for. Now, this part is different, but they both math out to make sure your cake won't stick. This part isn't related in the other one, but that's just because it doesn't have the chocolate in it. But after that, you have basic steps. You have this first one, which is to combine your dry, combine your wets. Combine your wets. This one would use an electric mixer because it uses butter instead of oil, but the oil will help the texture with the gluten-free. Also, we want to whisk in just as much air to that as we can. Now here's the part where you add dry to wet, but in this case you're working in batches to fold in the dry ingredients and the wine. In the other one, we would have added the milk, which is what we replaced with the wine, with the other wet ingredients, but I'm going to move this over to the other one and do it this way. Ran out of time, so part 2. So we're taking the wine from this cake recipe, which is a bundt cake. It's going to be thicker and heavier, and we are adding it to this chocolate cake recipe, which should ideally be airier, but it is gluten-free, so we'll see. The big difference that we found so far is that since we're replacing the milk in this recipe with wine, instead of adding the milk with the other wet ingredients, we're going to fold it in later. We'll just see how that goes. A difference that is relevant is that in this one, you're going to be baking it for about 30 to 32 minutes. In this one, you're going to be baking it for about 45 minutes. That makes sense because the other cake is heavier and is also in a bundt pan, so it's likely to be thicker. In this case, since we're still cooking them both at the same temperature, and in both cases the recipe says to cook it until the toothpick comes out clean, we'll start with 30 minutes, but it may go up to 45 minutes. That's fine. And the cooling instructions are actually the same. You let it rest in the pan for 10 minutes, and then you turn it out onto the rack and let it cool completely before doing anything to it. Now this one has you arrange the cake in layers and frost it evenly. And in this one you dust it with sugar and serve it with whipped cream, but those are both just garnishing steps. That doesn't affect the recipe's integrity. If I had been able to find these two had enough in common that I was able to kind of jump one element to another one. If this had been a bundt cake recipe, I probably would have tried to stick more to this recipe, which was the one that had gluten in it. And, but I didn't have that in a cookbook that I trust. And if this works out, I might see about adding wine to my brownie recipe. So we'll see about that. But this was closer than the brownie recipe, so I wanted to start as close as possible. I will update after I cook this to let y'all know how this turned out.